Welcome to the Business Behind Fundraising podcast, where you'll discover how to raise the kind of money your big vision requires without adding more events, appeals, or grant applications. Learn how to stop blocking overall revenue growth and start attracting investment-level donors with 𝘉𝘠𝘪.
Hey guys, this is Sherry, and you are listening to the Business Behind Fundraising podcast. Now, today you are meeting a client that I've been working on for, I think maybe we're at that half-year mark. I love talking to clients who are maybe halfway through our process, just to see how they're processing everything that we've been working on together. But here's how I want to introduce you to Mandy today. So Mandy is the ED of Green City Market. She's going to tell us all about what they're doing, how they're growing, all the goodness. But last week, my listeners know I invest in coaches too. It's been a huge part of the growth of my own business to invest in myself. So it's been, I'm such a believer in us investing in ourselves as leaders. So Mandy doesn't even know this, but I went to kind of a 2.5 day VIP planning, sounds real fancy session with one of my coaches. And we were talking about business growth, and we were talking about ideal client profile. So like ICP. And she said, this is what she said to me, and I thought of Mandy. She said, who is that client that when you see that they're on your calendar that day that you're like, oh, yeah. I can't wait to talk to that person. And I was like, oh, it's Mandy. It's Mandy Moody at Green City Market. And so then she said, describe that person. Because I said, if I had 20 Mandy Moody's, it would be my favorite business ever. So here's what I wrote. Mandy, I have my notebook. I'm
excited to hear this.
It says Mandy. Yeah, it says Mandy. Mandy is a savvy business woman. You're ambitious. You're goal-oriented. You're an action taker. I give Mandy an assignment she hasn't done the next morning. There's intention behind her decisions. She's process-oriented, tech-savvy. She's a great boss and leader. Her staff, your staff, likes being in meetings with you. I really believe that. You're conscious of equipping them just as much as equipping you. And I also wrote, I think you like having a partner. You are an A+ student. You're like, how do I do this, Sherry? Great. I'll be right back and do this. So I literally wrote 20 things. And I said, you're an expert. I wrote, you're friendly. We have fun on our calls, all the things. And so, Mandy, I am so excited to talk to you today as my ideal client.
I love it.
And so I just say that because the best part of my job is working with great leaders. Oh. And that has been one of the most fun parts about working with you and your team. So thank you for that opportunity on my end.
Thank you. That's such a lovely way to start. I really appreciate that. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I know we'll get to talking about this later, but as I was thinking about our conversation, thought partner is really what came to mind in terms of what I was looking for and what I feel like I found in you. So I think we're really aligned, right, on how this part.
So glad. Although I know you're one of a kind. I can't find 20 of you. You are one of a kind. So I'll give you that too. Okay. So give us the lay of the land, Mandy. Talk about Green City Market. Talk about how the last few years have been. I'd love for you also to share your journey into leadership with the organization. Just give us the lay of the land on how you've been killing it over there.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to. So Green City we've been around we're coming up on 25 years. And when I came onto the scene at Green City, I joined the team as the director of development in 2019. And the organization had growth over time, sort of incremental growth over time. But it was really evident to me that there was so much left on the table that we could really be doing. And so we'll talk a little bit about that coming up. But in terms of how I got there, it's kind of funny. I have spent my entire career in the nonprofit space. And I had been working for about 8 years. My prior gig was about 8 years working for a school. And my kids, my daughter was just old enough now to be going to that school. And I thought, this is perfect. This is where I'm going to be for the next 10 years while my kids go through school.
Right.
How much better can work-life balance get, right? And, it was interesting going, working at the school where my kids were at. It brought some unique challenges, I think. And so I started to think, maybe I want to do something a little bit different. Had my eye out there. And when the Green City Market job posting came up, it was like butterflies in the belly. I was like, this is it. Pairing my professional, just true passion for fund development and working in the nonprofit industry with my personal sort of upbringing and belief in local food and the farmers who grow it. I had never before been so connected to the mission. And so it was just like a lot of finger crossing as I was going through the process. I'm like, please let this work out. And all the stars aligned, and I joined the team in June of 2019. And the executive director at that time didn't have a fundraising background. And so I was really serving as a partner to her. Fast forward a couple of years, pandemic happens, right? And our executive director chose to move on to another opportunity. And I really had to think about, wow, I was not thinking I was going to be ready quite yet, right, for this executive director gig.
Did I sign up for this?
Yeah, exactly. My kids are still little, right? I'm like, oh my gosh, everyone's finally sleeping somewhat through the night, right? Like, can I now do that? But, I got some really wonderful advice from a dear friend who started out as a mentor and really just, we are raising our families together now, who said, you know what, you've got this knowledge, you've got this information, you're going to end up doing the work, right? Throw your hat in the ring and see how it goes, see how you like it. And when I tell you I was hooked, like day one, and we went through, I really appreciated and respected my board's process of going through a full nationwide search for the next executive director. And I was put through that same process because I was speaking with my, she's our board chair at the time and our vice chair who's since moved on, to say, I really want this to be the best decision for Green City Market. I don't want the gig just because I'm here. I want us to go through this process. And so it really helped us to start our feet off on a very trusting, right, transparent place, which has led to so many beautiful, wonderful things. And so that's really my pathway to becoming executive director. After about a 6 or so month search, I was named ED. I got the phone call literally on New Year's Eve. My board president was like,
oh my word.
Yes, she was like, I know that it's, I didn't want to call you on New Year's Eve, but I just thought you'd like to start 2021 with this news. And I was like, yes, thank you.
That is amazing.
Yes. So,
your anniversary.
That's right. Exactly. It's easy. Jan 1. So.
Oh my gosh. As a, I work all over the country, but being in Chicago and Green City Market in Chicago, Green City Market is a known entity, give me 3 lines on what Green City Market does and just the model, because oftentimes I find, and we've talked a lot about this, donors are like, oh yeah, Green City Market, I go there, I shop there, but they don't actually understand you're a nonprofit that runs on donations and really the mission behind the market. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So Green City Market, it's a blessing and a curse, right, to be well known, because so many folks have that name recognition, right? But as you said, they don't know we're a nonprofit. They don't know that the market isn't the only thing that we do. And so as we geared up to be working with you, one of the things that we really dialed into is our work is centered around this idea of securing the future of food. So folks face food insecurity for a variety of reasons, most well known, right, as a financial insecurity around access to quality, nutritious food. But because of climate change and because of our over-reliance on an industrial agricultural system as a society, we all are at risk of not having high quality, nutritious food accessible to us in the future. And so what we do, we have programs centered around deepening support for local sustainable farmers, around educating our community about who grows their food, how it's grown, and why they need to understand all of that. And then expanding food access, because access to local food, it's truly a right. It should not be a privilege. And everyone deserves the highest quality nutrition. And so we have a number of programs to make shopping at the farmers market more affordable and to ensure that we are distributing food broadly throughout the entire city of Chicago, not just in our market locations.
Love that. Okay, that gives me context. Now, you came to me and you were growing. You came to me after a huge growth year. Tell me about your numbers. Tell me just how you've grown, how you've done it, and then we'll start talking about what's next. What's the next step, and how the work is that we're doing is kind of supporting you in that.
For sure. So when I started as executive director, we were around a $750,000, $760,000 a year revenue organization. And we had been that for a number of years. I plotted out in my first year as ED, I plotted our 990s because I was curious to see have we ever experienced any big dips? What's the story here? And we had always sort of steadily grown just a teeny tiny bit. And truly, I before our conversation, I pulled our numbers. In 2020, we were a $764,000 organization. And then in 2021, we were a $766,000 organization, right? So
what?
A little bit of growth, right? But I mean, negligible, right? But then what we really did in 2021, under my first year as ED, is we got our financial story of impact in a tighter space than it had been in. And what I mean by that is we took a look at our chart of accounts and really we were like, where are these programs? If I, right, as the ED, or if our board can't clearly just go to our profit and loss statement and see what programs we have, there's a problem here, right? And so we reorganized that and did a ton of work around understanding the expense side of the business. And that really led us to knowing our numbers better. We weren't still yet quite at a point where when we worked together, understanding the full cost of operating those programs. Step one was truly just what are the direct costs even, right? How do we untangle that from office supplies and right? All these sort of big buckets that needed more detail. And in doing that, right, and there's so many other things that play into it, but in doing that, we grew from a $766,000 organization to a $1.2 million organization in 1 year. About 60% growth.
Holy smokes.
Wild, right? Wild. I mean, it's one of those things too. I often talk with my development team because, it's somewhat unique, I'm finding, to have a development background and be in the executive director role. So often we see ops professionals and programs professionals rising to that level, which kudos to you, because if I didn't have 15 years of development experience under my belt, I mean, this would be way harder. But when I told my staff, when we closed out the books and we hit 1.2 million, I said, I know y'all, if we had set that goal at the beginning of 2022, we would have been oh my gosh, how are we going to do it? Because we didn't have the revenue side of it planned out. And that's what we'll talk about in a little bit, about how we've worked really with you on 2022. For me was really about shoring up the bottom of the P&L, right? Understanding our expenses a little bit better. But we're targeting, we've got a $1.6 million need this year. And that growth, I think, is really going to be driven by the work that we've been doing together in understanding both the expense side and the revenue side, pulling it all together. And frankly, getting a lot of the stuff that's up in my brain down on paper, right? And in a way that we can share it with other people.
So good. So good. Okay. So you've gone 766 to 1.2 and now 1.6. And then I say, and I flippantly say, Well, next year's 2 million. Like, I'm just pushing you up and over the line.
Truly.
Because you can do it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we did in that first year too, was we really understood both what our growth budget was, right? How are we growing? But then also visionarily. So 2 million, yes, in 2024, but in the future, we're working towards a $3 to $5 million budget, because I think we're like confidently now seated in a place where we're doing big, important work with big, important impact. And that costs money to do that work. And so I think gaining in that confidence of being able to speak really clearly about what our business plan is for this work and what impact programmatically we're going to have as a result of people investing in our mission and in our work together. It gives me, instead of anxiety, right? I have confidence. I'm like, yes, we're going to do this. So it feels really good.
So good. Okay. So you were doing tons of things right when you came to me. Like, tell me what that next, like, what was the top one or two or whatever you feel comfortable saying? Like, what really was the problem you were trying to solve when so many things are and were going right? Tell me what that shift is where you're like, yeah, but I need help with X. I mean, even as a fundraiser, an established, successful fundraiser.
Yeah. So I think it was really two main things really step up for me is one, I think, again, we had the expense side kind of figured out, right? We were much clearer on what these programs actually cost to run. And through that process, right, we really were defining, I mean, you can untangle that project even deeper to understand we were really figuring out what was an activity versus a project versus a program, right? So we really had a ton of work to do to understand that. And on the revenue side, we were like, okay, well, we know what it's going to cost now, right? And we're going to get there somehow, right? We kind of knew our big budgets. We had really been in a practice for a number of years of budgeting just based on last year plus X, right? Which so many people do. And it's not really tied to any like, okay, but what are you going to do with that money? How are you actually going to grow in your programmatic impact? And so we were really looking for support and guidance around developing that financing plan, really understanding what are those top 30 gifts, and even knowing like, oh my gosh, we should, with a really small fundraising team, right? It's just, I have one development manager who manages one development coordinator. And then you've got me, right, on the fundraising team as well.
Yes.
And so really thinking about when we have, 4 events a year and multiple appeals a year and all these things, it's like, how do we get ourselves out of that grind truly? And what should we be focusing on? What does that number actually look like? Right. So that was one thing, understanding like, okay, we've got like the big bucket, but how do we break this down in bite-sized chunks so we aren't anxious about, oh my God, we just grew 60%. And now you're talking about doubling the revenue in the course of 2 years.
And Sherry says 2 million and then 3 million.
Right, right.
It's practical. Like, it really is, like, I'm a big believer, and maybe it's because spreadsheets are my love language. That might be the case. But I say, we can create a 30-page narrative if you want on what the activities are, but it really all has to come back to, do we truly have a financing plan that shows us, if we want to be a $2 million organization, these are the steps financially for us to get there, and how that's rooted in hours to dollars and all of those things. When, like you said, it's like, so often it's like, we need to grow, so let's just try to crank up all the existing things that we're doing. Yeah. But I think like you're really, I would say like a reflective leader to say, well, that's great. What got us here is great, but are there things that perhaps we do need to look at stop doing so we can start doing other activities? Or I remember you saying one day, like, I'm kind of doing lots of these things, and it's, we can all improve in areas, but it's also a bit of like, no, keep doing that, or put it on the calendar, and some practical and tactical steps that we just have to make step after step after step that get us to the big numbers.
That's right.
Sometimes we make it harder than it needs to be, I find.
That's right. I mean, I remember even, and this kind of, it speaks to the second reason is, as you mentioned, kind of at the top of the podcast, really wanting and needing a thought partner. Right. And I think really having someone to say, hey, I had this sticky situation, or I'm unclear on how to like jump the hurdle and like actually make the ask with this particular person. Or I remember talking to you one day on like, okay, great. We've got our financing plan. Right. And now it's like, I needed that kick in the butt to be like, all right, now schedule those meetings, Mandy, go do it. Right.
Come back to me with 5.
Right. Yeah. It was like having that accountability. And, you know, I hold a lot of accountability in myself, but having that external accountability too, to be like, oh my goodness, we're going to, you know, in 2 weeks, we're going to have another meeting with Sherry, and I want to show up to that meeting, right? Having made progress on these things, was really, really helpful. And interesting, right? Because as a new ED, I had previously been used to having a DOD above me or having someone above me, right? To be providing that, that sort of sense of urgency. But it was more, you know, in that experience, it was the grind. It was the grind of the urgency of like, did that appeal get to the printer on time? Did that like, right? It wasn't, how are you getting out from behind the desk, right? To go have these meetings and to be connecting with people. And as a small shop ED, right, there's 12 people on my team, which sounds huge to me now because there were like 4 or 5 when we started.
Right. You've tripled that as well.
Right? Yeah. Exactly. We've got a staffing plan for about 30 people that I think would be chef's kiss, because right now, you know, we're still figuring out, you know, before we were working together, I was doing 100% of the HR, 100% of the accounting, 100% of all of these things that I know a lot of your listeners who are in either, you know, nascent young nonprofits, or they're just small, right? And they're looking to scale. I think as executive directors, we can find ourselves grinding on all the like everyone else's stuff. We talk all the time internally now about like, Sherry helped us put the rock before the sand, you know, like,
oh my gosh, I love that.
Plug that in, right? How do we put those things first? And then, right, if there's time, then we can think about some of these other things that, you know, we find maybe aren't as impactful. And it's okay that that thing didn't get done because the rock happened.
Yes. So good. I might steal that. That's a LinkedIn post waiting to happen. So I think part of the, oftentimes that rock is the time that it takes to do relational fundraising versus transactional fundraising that feels easier, feels quicker, feels like something we can check off our list. Again, appeals and events, those are important things. But talk to me a little bit about how you've shifted into a heavier cadence of major gift work, and maybe what aspects are working, like what you've been surprised by, like how is that shift into getting those meetings on the calendar and going and doing them successfully? How's that been for you?
Yeah. So I think, you know, it's interesting, things like, you know, email, and getting into that grind of like, I think a lot of people really, and I definitely identify with this, right? You do something like email because you're like, I can check it off a list. I did a thing, right? It's just like doing your dishes. I cleared the dishes, but guess what? Every time we do that, then more comes, right? More emails come because you sent emails. So more emails are coming back, and you just find yourself in this grind, right?
And I will add it to my list to cross it off my list too.
I'm totally guilty of that. 100%.
Good. That's why I like it.
Yes. But I think for me, kind of getting myself out of that groove was just knowing that about myself, right? And so instead of the focus around, I'm going to put, you know, a 30-minute time block in my calendar to do emails, it's, all right, what's my hour time block or 40-minute time block where I'm going to knock out sending these 6 emails to get just that first outreach, right? To try and get that meeting. And what was wild, I remember talking to you after that first round of setting meetings. I was like, oh my gosh, people want to meet with me. Like, what?
Because you're fancy. What? People do want to meet with you. They like you.
And it's like, it was, I think there was this underlying, I don't know, fear of like, well, what if they say no? And then, oh my gosh, did I waste that time? And it's almost like you talk yourself out of it right before you do it. And so I set myself those things that I could check off. It's, working on scheduling that meeting, and then knowing, I think one of the things I love about, some of the tools that we've developed together is their stages, right? That we're working people to, and we're leading them to that next step. We talk about that a lot. And so if we can re-envision or reimagine in our minds that those are steps you're ticking off, closing the gift is just one step. But there are other steps that need to be checked off right before we get to that point of even asking and then ultimately closing the gift. And I think helping to shift my mindset there and seeing like, oh, we are doing things, right? Sometimes when we're meeting heavy, we're like, but did anything really get accomplished? Yeah, having the meeting got accomplished. And that's big and that's huge, and it's relationship building. But it is still something that we can like look back on and say, like, yes, I had a productive day. Let's honor that was productive. It wasn't like, I got to have lunch and that's fun and great, but that was a productive, there was intention behind why I met with who I met with, right? What we were talking about. And that has made all the difference, and all the tools we've developed together have helped put pen to paper on knowing that was an actionable thing I did, right? That I can check off the list.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that sometimes relational fundraising feels counterintuitive because it feels like it's taking longer because it should, and that's the right way to do it. That we don't ask in every meeting. We don't drive to the numbers in every meeting. How have your conversations maybe in those donor meetings changed? What's the new story you're telling, or what are you doing now that maybe you weren't doing in the past?
I think creating and giving that space, right? Like you said, I think we were previously in a space where it was always asking, right? We were reaching out always because we were going to be asking for something. I mean, I had donors that we were like, hey, can we use that gift, as a matching appeal, or right, whatever. Even if it wasn't asking them for money, it was still an ask. And so I think one of the things, I know when we first started this year, we had a donor that you and I were talking about. We're like, oh my gosh, we want to get out ahead, right? And use this incredible tool that we've been developing, have a conversation with them first, right? Because we thought I think there's more capacity here. There's some interest. And what happened, right? That donor ended up giving before we had the meeting. And at first I was like, oh, Sherry, what are we going to do?
I failed.
I gave before we were ready. And it's like, oh my gosh, wow, how much undoing do we need to do in our brains about, like, it's not about our timeline. And it's not a fail, right? To then be able, I had a beautiful conversation with this person where I helped to like anchor and provide information about how critical their gift was. Because when we were showing folks our giving chart, people had no idea. It's really interesting. I get kind of two reactions to it. One, oh my gosh, I had no idea that you needed gifts of this size, right? And then we've got some real visionary folks who are like, we need to pump those numbers up. And I'm like, let's go. Where are you going to be?
Well, let me introduce you to my $5 million organization.
Right. Exactly. And so I think having it down on paper, I say paper, right? But it's iPads, it's digital things that we're doing, even when we're in person. But having something, right, to like look back to and point to and say, we were ready for this conversation. Yeah. We're not like on the fly, like, oh yeah, that was important. And they know because it's all a part of a bigger conversation, right? And that I think has been one of the most transformational things, is that you come in ready, knowing that like, I'm not winging it. I know exactly what I'm doing. And even when before, cause I said to you, I think too once, like I knew a lot of this stuff already, right? It was in my head, but taking that time to put the structure in place, to build the tools, I think honored the donor and my own knowledge in a way that we had not done before, right? To say, we're prepared, we're ready, we know our stuff, and you can now say that too.
And that, I just feel like you speaking that way and you're hearing it. Donors are saying, oh my gosh, we should think bigger.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know you needed this. I think they're responding to that because you're sitting so confidently at the table. I mean, you're a confident person, but there is a different air when you have the tools and you know what slide's coming. And it's not all about the deck, of course, or the tools that we use, but gosh, they are a bridge often to what a donor doesn't understand. And we just didn't get that they didn't understand that we need to be bigger or why we need to be bigger.
Right.
And that builds confidence. Like I hope you're hearing, like, oh gosh, what a great leader.
Oh yeah.
Aren't you going to do great things with my money? I should give you more. I mean, oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah. I am thinking back to a recent coffee meeting that I had where I was meeting with one donor and a friend of his just happened to come into the coffee shop. And so he said, oh, pull up a chair. And he kind of winked at me and said like, oh, this is somebody you should get to know. And I was having this conversation and I had never met this guy before. And he was asking me a lot of, financial related questions, right? About what about this? What about that? And it was so funny, Sherry. It was like any question he had, I'm like, aha, and here we go, right? To the next conversation.
I'm so proud.
To the next, right? And he said at the end, I'm trying to remember if it was like stocks and bonds or something like that, right? Like big, like Wall Street kind of finance folks that I'm talking to. And he was like, oh, you could go in and do that work too. Just the confidence that he had in the business case was really what he was conveying of like, wow, you really know your stuff. And that's impressive because we don't see that often, right? I think, and it's not even, right? I think the people listening, it's like, it's not even that you don't necessarily know it. You might know it. Right. But have you taken the time to put it in a way, right, that others can see that you really do know it, and that you're ready for all those questions. And when they pose something to you that you're not, they confidently know, like, it's a new, interesting conversation that could come up, right? Yeah.
And that's you shifting. I feel like that's what I mean when I say we don't find donors, we attract investment level donors. Right. And what you just did attracted that person. Right. And they said, oh, hold on. I'm hearing something different. And you were prepared. You've done the work. You've invested in yourself. And you had the tools in hand. You answered all the questions. That is attracting investment level donors. That is how, you fund 50 to 75% of your revenue with top 30 donors. Like that mentality, preparedness, of course, and all of those things. But that person is going to tell their friend, I never hear nonprofits talk like that. You should go talk to this Mandy Moody character.
That's right.
That's who gets referred, I find.
Yeah. And I'll tell you too, it's really interesting. I had another conversation with another person who's been around the organization since its beginning, knew the founder. I never had the fortune of knowing our founder, but she had been around from the beginning. And I was talking her through, our conversation guide and really walking through and sharing, here's what we're doing and here's where we're really going and growing. And the best compliment that I don't know if I've maybe ever gotten was she said to me at the end of our conversation, Mandy, I don't think that I have ever heard the vision, Abby's vision, communicated in such a clear way. And I really, really appreciate all of what you've put together and showed because it is so clear the path of how you are going to secure the future of food. It's not just, right, our market program. It's a critical foundational program. It provides incredible direct-to-consumer sales opportunities that are absolutely essential for our local small-scale growers. It's critical, but it's not the only thing, right, that we're doing. Yes. And that intervention alone will not secure the future of food. We got to do this whole thing, right? And I'm doing this because we've got a beautiful circular visual
we do.
that we share with folks. And from having that visual to talking about the, like, why do we exist, to talking about how we're going to solve that problem, and then leading folks in to the financial conversation of really knowing, we know what it's going to cost. We know where you fit in, and here, let's present this opportunity to you. For her to say that meant so much because, our founder was a visionary. She really knew what she wanted to convey and accomplish. And I feel like we are now, as we look ahead to 2024, it's going to be our 25th anniversary. We're just so well positioned now, right? To say, next generation of Green City Market, here we go. We're going to be doing big things. And so that's incredibly exciting.
You are. Oh my gosh. Okay. I do want to touch on, so you talked about your extreme staff growth. Talk to me a little bit about how you're growing your development team, who are amazing fundraisers in their own right. Talk to me a little bit about how you're balancing the fundraising you have to do, also bringing your team along, equipping them to have their own portfolios, come back into the office and be like, oh, I also got a $10,000 gift. Talk to me a little bit about how you're balancing that, how you're growing them, just as leaders and fundraisers, when you're still, holding a good amount of the portfolio as well.
Yeah. So this is one of the greatest joys of my work. I love coaching people. I love it. I get so much joy out of like other people's wins. And so we've done a couple of things. One of the things is just, we've got folks coming. So I've got a development manager, as I said, and I've got a development coordinator who works primarily on like institutional giving. So foundation relationships, corporate relationships, and simply like inviting them to be in the space at the onset was the first thing of like, oh my gosh, let's get them a seat at the table so that they can hear. And there have been a number of, especially in the corporate space, right? We had consistently really just been going after like these sponsorship based asks, right? Not giving an opportunity to understand if a corporation leader was interested in really making a philanthropic investment in the cause. And so we switched that, right? And we started having these conversations. Yeah. And the first couple, right, that we had, it was super evident early on that like, okay, this person is still going to be a sponsorship person. And so what my team member was able to see was like, how did I pivot in that conversation to honor everyone's time when it became clear that this wasn't going to be the philanthropic kind of conversation. And that is okay too. I think I did some coaching after some of those conversations to say, I would hear like, oh man, I was really hoping that we were going to get to do the whole thing, right? And like talk to them about all these cool ways they could invest. I said, but no, now we know. Now we know what kind of time we're going to invest in that relationship. Yeah. And that's great, right? And so, and we have had other conversations that have led down the path of, one gift going from $2,500 to $15,000, right? Wild. And they're seeing that conversation too. And so what I've heard back is it's really helpful to have a seat at the table to understand like how effortlessly, right, we pivot and like we don't show like we can be disappointed that a conversation didn't go the way we thought it was going to go. We're only human, right? But we can still then have that confidence of like, okay, great. Well, let me talk to you about this opportunity. Let me talk to you about that. Great. But again, now we know we're not going to chase after 6 more meetings with them, because it's coming from a very particular budget or a very particular reason that they're engaging with us. And that's okay. So I think that on the like Corp Foundation side, and then on the individual side, my development manager just this last week, actually, we were talking with a prospective donor and they were trying to get the meeting on the books and I wasn't going to be available. And I said, you know what? I think you've got this. Like you've got this. You can do this. I feel really good I have total faith and confidence in you. And so she went and she had the meeting and we talked a day or two later and she was like, I'm so grateful that you actually weren't there because I think I needed that experience of you not being there and me just taking the leap off the diving board for the first time.
I love
in a safe space, right? Like she had shared, she's like, this particular donor is like, she's so kind and she's so warm and she asks wonderful questions and she really wants to have a conversation, right, with you. So it was like a really, it was a wonderful donor to be talking to for the first time. And so knowing that, right, teeing up, like, let's not send our folks out to the people that we all know who are, right?
let's not send them to the
right
to that one. Yeah.
Let's give them some opportunity to have those successful conversations. But it was great because I think, again, it gave her that confidence. And now, we do weekly one-on-ones, and on my one-on-one check-in with her is like, okay, who are those 5? What are the 5 lunches you're going to have in Q2? Because you can do it, right? You showed yourself that you can do it. Who's next?
She can.
Right? Yeah.
That's excellent. What a release.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That it's not all on you. I mean, she's great.
Yeah.
She's going to be great.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me, at this, I think we're kind of halfway through our engagement. Because this kind of work takes months, you aren't at the 2 million or 3 million yet.
Right.
But tell me about just even the biggest wins, I would say, that you've felt, or the biggest tangible outcome that you're sitting at here halfway through.
Yeah, I think the biggest win so far, to be honest with you, it's not even, like financially, we've closed some gifts that I was like, oh my gosh, I would have never imagined. I mean, just yesterday I heard of another, this was a corporate sponsor donor, right, who came in originally at like around, I think they were around 3,000 when we first started working with them, and they're doing 10 this year, just through having more strategic conversations. But I think like non-financially, right, because those financial wins are definitely there, but I think that the entire team is aligned, right, and everyone knows where we're going, and to include, right, not just my development staff, but we had a number of calls with you where my program staff or my operations staff were sitting in, and when they weren't sitting in, they were still being brought along and being provided updates about the work that we're doing. And that is truly, I think, the biggest win, to really have clarity for everyone about here's where we're going, here's how it impacts you, how it impacts you, how it impacts you, and the role that everyone plays in this sort of symphony that we're creating together. And again, the confidence that then everyone is left with is huge, right? To think about a number as big as 1.6 for someone who was raising just 2 years ago, half that, right? It can be very anxiety producing because, there's so much when the donor is considering the gift, like that part is out of your hands, right? We talked about like that part, that's on them.
Release.
But everything leading up to it and everything after it, we do have control over how we're showing up for our donors, for our organization, for ourselves, and having everyone on that same page through that, the structure that you helped us to provide has definitely been the biggest takeaway for me.
Amazing. I love that. Okay, Mandy, how can people find you on LinkedIn? Give me the website. Give me all the things, because you are on LinkedIn with me.
I know. I was like, I'm a LinkedIn queen right alongside Sherry. So I'm Mandy Moody. Mandy 𝘉𝘶𝘴𝘪𝘯𝘥 is my maiden name on LinkedIn. So please do connect with me. I love connecting with folks, networking with folks, talking about this experience. And I share right on LinkedIn about how things are going. So you can find me there on LinkedIn. 𝘉𝘶𝘪𝘯𝘥.org is where you can find more about Green City. And we're on all the Instagram, Facebook, just at Green City Market. And I definitely encourage listeners to check it out and really see live kind of how this is working, how it's unfolding for Green City. Because the mission impact, right? Like if you are one of those leaders who came from the program side, I got to tell you, focusing on this may feel super unnatural, right? Because I want to do the thing, I want to do the mission. But when I tell you, like our access program is up 600%, right? Because we are taking the time to do this critical work. Without the money behind it, we can't make the mission impact. And so follow along for the ride. It's fun. It's every day. It's fun.
It's a fun ride. You are an A+ student in every way, shape, and form. That makes my job fun and easier. And it's just been really a pleasure getting to know you and your whole team. Right. So thanks for taking their time today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sherry. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Business Behind Fundraising podcast. Tune in weekly and you'll get seriously good at fully funding your organization's big vision year after year. Yes, even your overhead. Visit www.quamtaylor.com. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts.